Hey everyone, welcome for a new installment of Software as a Team Sport. I have Travis Wagner here with me today. He is a senior developer at Crunchyroll, and he's going to tell us a bit more about, the teams he's worked on, some of the stuff he's done in the past, and I will let him take it away and give us a little bit of backstory.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a senior developer at Crunchyroll just yet. Monday, first day. So yeah, I've been programming for 21 years now. Started when I was 14, a long time ago. I've been doing it professionally for about 15 now. I got started just like making games, and not doing anything serious. And then, I was doing a lot of graphic design for my band back then, and that kind of led one thing led to another. And the natural progression of things is kind of just how I kept going further into development. It's because, once you're designing, then they want you to design a website. And once you're designing a website, they want you to make the website. And then once I made my band's website, other bands wanted me to make their websites. And it kind of, started getting a little work from there. And so I've been through, just making, plain HTML, CSS, JavaScript websites to, then going into like WordPress and PHP, and then some like raw PHP stuff, more vanilla PHP. Kind of just, progressively went further and further down the web dev stack from there. And this will actually be my first job where I'm not doing web dev. And then most recently I was at Universal Music for the past two or three. I can't remember how long it's been.
That's fine.
But yeah, spent a couple of years there. Working on some big artists, Taylor Swift, Drake and all that. The Beatles, and it was really exciting to, because I'm big into music. I've always been huge into music, and so it was really exciting to be working on those sites. And people are like, do you like email them? Do you talk to them? I'm like, yeah, man. They message me personally all the time. And no,
Interesting. That's really cool.
they don't.
No. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, I was like,
Um,
that sounds skeptical, but all right.
but yeah. So I mean, that's where I'm at right now. Kind of moving away from development, web development. I mean, towards video, kind of the video streaming side of things, video encoding. So I'm excited to, I do a lot of stuff outside of web development anyway. And I did a lot of internal tooling and like dev tooling, stuff at Universal too. And even some leaning into like DevOps, deployment systems and things like that. But this will be like my first like job doing it. So
Okay, cool. So wait, like you mentioned that you were doing like band websites back in the day. Was that like how far back in the day? Was that like MySpace pages?
oh yeah, started at MySpace pages. Because you
Nice.
could edit the HTML and stuff.
Yep.
And do a lot with that. And made some cool designs and then put them up. And then people were like, "Well, who did your MySpace?" And then, afterwards we actually had a real domain and stuff. But yeah, a lot of MySpace stuff starting out.
Yeah, I think it's kind of cool. Like the early like web kind of like funneled us into being web developers, right?
Yep.
GeoCities taught me HTML, and
Yep.
then MySpace taught me CSS.
Yep.
So it was destiny at that point.
Yeah. And the MySpace taught me about like SQL injection and
Ooh,
XSS. Yeah, because
true.
you could sneak in some little bits of JavaScript if you tried hard enough.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a good call. Okay, interesting. So yeah, you mentioned that you're going to be joining a new team. Basically, once this goes live, you will have already been on the team. But what is something that you kind of like? How do you embed yourself into a new team? Right? They have existing workflows and all that stuff. How do you discover that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think the onboarding experience is super important there, right? Because you come into, especially a big company, you come in and it's this huge code base or multiple code bases, and some of them are just, behemoth, just huge things. And it takes a long time just to even, you can't just like jump, doesn't matter if you're senior staff, doesn't matter what level engineer or developer you are, you can't just jump into a code base like that. You'll mess things up. You don't even understand the pipeline. How things get approved. None of that process yet. So that first little bit, that first week or so is really just they say senior devs, and above the kind of mentor, but you need to be handheld through the process. That first little bit, just so you're not rushing in trying to fix a problem and end up breaking three things or pissing other people off.
Right. Exactly. Like, is there any like strategy you have? Like, what do you look at first when you join a new team? Is it the README? Do you try and like ask if they have a knowledge base or things like
Yeah,
that?
definitely ask if they have a knowledge base. Some I try to ask that in like interview processes too, because it kind of says a lot about a team, where they store their knowledge for developers. And like I think a great place is in like the wikis for GitHub or in the READMEs for GitHub, because we're there anyway, right? But just if they have some collective knowledge, if they keep, if they like make it a requirement to like keep updating, that is a green flag there. Um, but yeah, I mean, you jump in, and of course, like the whole time you're just poking around. You have to see how these systems work. You kind of just looking around, but you really do need that time, and the ability to ask, the like feeling comfortable asking those questions about like seemingly stupid questions right at the beginning about whatever code base you're going into.
Are there any specific tools you've used in the past, maybe, to like discover things about these things, like how these files like connect to each other, seeing like this
Hmm.
visual of like a hierarchy or anything?
I mean, not outside of like people doing some organization in like Confluence or something like that.
Sure.
Doing a little bit of that, but that's not. I don't love that anyway.
Right.
But beyond that, not really. I mean, I know we have like language models and stuff. But their input tokens and stuff. You can't really ask about general questions about a huge code base. Um, and so my experience kind of came from when I was poking around like programming language projects. Looking at like Rust's whole project and seeing how they structured it, seeing the way they do like Git submodules, and like just seeing how they organize their repositories on GitHub as well. Really was kind of helpful, just because it's such an enormous code base. And I think a lot of people, if they don't work for really large companies with really large code bases or things like that, that they don't understand how to navigate, how to begin navigating an extremely large code base.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things with Rust where like the compile times can really balloon if you don't have your like separate modules like scoped out better, right? Like you're going to have a common module that they all depend on that you have to recompile everything, but you
Yeah,
can
and you
modify
you can
one
get
thing
stuck.
without changing the other stuff,
Yeah, you
right?
can get stuck, trying to, because it has incremental compiling, but if you don't organize things right, you might end up compiling way more than you need.
Exactly. 100%. What was it like forking an existing language? Like, I'm sure you get that asked that all the time.
No, I mean, I didn't think really a whole lot of it, as being like the whole Crablang project, began as a very pragmatic solution. I think uh, it still is a pragmatic solution. People are like, is it dead? Is it going anywhere? I'm like, It serves the purpose that it needs to serve." Like, if the community wants to contribute, they can. If the Rust Foundation or the language starts going in a direction that we see the influence of these corporate um, influences, that if we see that, then we can choose to go in a different direction. So I never really thought too much of it. Like I said, I was like, we're just renaming things. We don't even like, the whole thing is that it's not like the whole thing is very pragmatic. Let's just say that.
Sure.
So like but we dealt with that situation of the size of the code base a lot when people would suggest things, and I'm like, you can absolutely start this project, but a lot of people don't understand that you can't just like add a feature to Rust. Like, like you're affecting so many systems, and it, like everything is so intertwined, um, at the language level, that it's just it's a daunting thing to do, especially for anybody who's not familiar with the code base.
Right. But it's almost nice having that fork because you can actually just like mess around and find out,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah, that
you're
I
not
do
going to
that.
break anyone else's stuff.
Yeah, I do that quite a bit. I do that quite a bit, actually.
Cool. Yeah, that's fun. Are there any like features that you've kind of worked on that, you're excited about, or you're just like, well, I wanted to see if it worked and it actually did.
Yeah, so there's a feature there that where like kind of implementing something similar like Go's concurrency model,
Hmm.
where they have to get like the green threads and stuff. Go, what is it? Go threads? I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
Go routines.
Go routines. There it is. And so I was like, I had this kind of like whole complex macro system, kind of laying it out in the existing language, and I was like, I wonder if that could be, that seems like, because I think the easier features to do are things that are kind of adding on top, instead of like that need to be coupled with all these other language features, or be affected by all these other language features. The less things that it touches, the better. You can just add this feature on top, and so that's one thing I've been kind of experimenting more lately at the language level, is getting something like similar to Go routines.
Interesting. So I don't know if you're aware, like you probably are, but Rust actually used to have green threading built
Yeah.
into the core. Did you end up looking at some of that
No,
prior art?
I actually did.
Okay, I was just curious.
And I think I didn't I just didn't think of it, but really, if they didn't use it, I don't know.
Yeah, I think they wanted to make sure that like the right patterns were being like discovered, and they were trying to compete with Go at first before realizing that they could just go a different direction than Go,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
think that was a big part of it. This is back when like the compiler was still OCaml, you know?
Yeah, well, and they have such a deliberate concurrency model now. But I do these things not because I think that the language needs it, but because I think it's fun. And I think,
Yeah, and like I remember messing with Rust back in the day when they hadn't solidified around Tokyo and that entire model, right? Like that entire like async await style model. Like there was a lot of just random things people were trying, which was really cool. Like
yeah,
there was Eventual, which was just a library for like promise style futures, but not quite as zero abstraction as futures RS.
yeah,
And I think it was a better developer experience, but it did have overhead. But it was
yeah.
cool to
I
like see
think
the ecosystem.
I do
Yeah.
think like that kind of convergence around Tokyo is I wish more of those things were baked into the language. I wish that because you just don't get consensus on what the best way to do these things is.
Hmm. I think they did that intentionally almost though,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
once you
That's kind of the
establish that consensus, you can't ditch it.
Yeah, well, and it's kind of there's a lot of like that's the Rust way, right? Is that even for some seemingly very trivial things, you reach the standard library is much smaller than Go's, for instance. So you rely on well known crates for that.
Hmm. Yep, exactly. Like I think Tower is one of those like
Hmm.
middleware
Yep.
kind of like everything crates for building up like HTTP servers now, which
Yeah,
is cool.
and a lot of like the audio stuff that I try because I do a lot of play around with a lot of audio stuff in Rust, and you have to reach for crates for just anything.
Hmm. Have you tried making any VSTs or something? I remember
Yeah.
talking with people back in the day that making a VST with Rust wasn't a good idea, but now maybe it's better.
So it's funny you say that because I check back about once every 3 or 4 months on that, see the state of things. And I just checked yesterday, and the state of things is pretty much the same as it was. And so you can make they have VST3 support now for certain things. But if I can't, the thing is, if I can't have VST3 support and AU support, and whatever that Pro Tools format is, if I can't have it be completely cross-platform and cross-support, then it's not worth it. Because you have it's not even close to competing with something like the Juice framework for C++. Um, and the AU support is abysmal. You're just reaching directly using the FFI to like make calls to Objective C, which is not what you want.
Right. I don't mind Objective C, but I get it. I get
But I
it.
mean, it's just not what you want to do. Like that's not the point.
Exactly.
That's not the point of Rust, right?
Yeah, you want to be writing just pure Rust all the way
Hmm.
through. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. I guess getting back to teams, like, have there been times where you had to introduce like new technology to a team, right? And like, how did you go about on like, training up the rest of your team on this thing?
Yeah. I mean, so for a long time, before I was even even introducing Rust at all to teams, but I was for a few teams I've introduced TypeScript where they were using pure JavaScript. For my last team that I was leading, I did the same. They could, I started off by introducing it through like JS doc syntax. I think that's a great way. If you have a team that is hesitant about the advantages of TypeScript, then JS doc syntax is a great way to just you can just do it without it affecting they don't have to even change the file to the name. You put a tsconfig file in the project. You're good to go. And of course it's more verbose. It's a little more cumbersome. Um, but it at least shows some of the benefits, the basic benefits that you get from TypeScript. And then you can be like, we can have this everywhere. And I think, I think it's good. But yeah, so multiple teams, I've been the guiding voice to move them over to TypeScript. I think it's, all but one time, I think it was beneficial.
Sure. And when you're doing that, is it just simply like we do it with the code base and kind of boil the frog, or do you ever like schedule like a hackathon to like let's work on some random side project that doesn't affect anything and we can just move as fast as we want and break things?
No, no, I've never done that. I've always started with like, usually if in this last case, for instance, I start with a project that's small or something that's like dev tooling that we already have. It's not going to affect anything big if we mess
Sure. The
if
scope
we're
of it is just like
yeah,
limited.
if we're learning. So you kind of can you kind of can have that same attitude of like just go wild learning. If you mess up, it's not the end of the world. Before we get everybody into production or whatever. But I like that idea. No, I've never done it.
Sure. Yeah. No. At a previous company I worked at, which was an agency, we would do like a yearly dev retreat, and at a couple of those, we'd like introduce new technology to like all the devs, which was pretty cool. I
Yeah.
think TypeScript was one at one point, and like learning some like AI, like reinforcement learning stuff was another one. Like I don't know, I
Yeah.
really liked that approach, and I just haven't seen it happen at a lot of other companies. So
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I think that there's also I've also introduced like AWS to teams before, and I know when you think about tech, think about like maybe a different framework or programming language or something or testing framework, something like that. But I think just introducing like the concept of serverless and moving away from it to a different mental model really helped our team, especially when you're dealing with like large scales and talking when the discussion becomes around like. Pricing and around these huge operations.
right, right. Yeah, because it can really like balloon, like especially if you're doing serverless where you're doing a lot in one invocation instead of just like fanning out to
Yeah.
like a bunch of like smaller invocations via like a queue or something, right?
Yeah, well,
Like,
in our case, it ended up being a lot cheaper, when we were reaching, like, the capability limits of GitHub Actions, like, runners, we ended up having to use our, self-hosted runners, and those, we were doing on, like, these basically VPS instances, scaling vertically. And it was just, we're just getting bogged down constantly. We would end up adding a ton more, and then other people would start sharing those resources, and it was just a whole hassle. And, it just became much cheaper to run it on AWS too, because you pay for what you use.
sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, Related to the TypeScript thing, we actually just migrated GitKraken Desktop from Flow to TypeScript.
Oh, nice.
It turns
Nice.
out one dev basically just took the reins and did this as his like weekend kind of like side thing.
Yes,
And
yeah.
he was just maintaining this fork for months, this like 500,000 lines of changes for this 600,000 line repo.
That's a bold strategy
It
because
was bold. And then, yeah, at one point he's just like, hey, I think we can do this. And the
yeah,
reason for it is like huge. Basically, when you would make a change to a flow file, it has to check the entire project. Whereas like, TypeScript can start with just the file and then like branch out from there via the language server. So you can get like more instant feedback. Whereas like Flow, like you'd make a change, 30 seconds later, you might see like, oh, this could be potentially undefined, and you got to
yeah.
add like the question mark operator.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people ask how I've gotten how to convince a team or how to convince somebody that TypeScript is like good, and I'm like, it really, a lot of people approach it with the wrong mindset just right off the bat. I'm like, it really is not that difficult if you just start with like the idea that you don't have to write a test to see if you pass the right value to a function. You just see it right before anything happens.
Hmm.
That I mean, start there and then go with like basic shapes of interfaces and things like that.
Yeah, shortening the feedback loop.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I think sometimes people they introduce it and they come on way too strong because TypeScript, like especially some of the advanced stuff, can look like an absolute mess, and you're just like, what is this?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, some of the types that libraries have to do to expose like
Yes,
a good interface to like actual developers is
yes.
brutal.
I think
But
a lot of
even
people.
then, oh, go ahead.
No, I think a lot of people who really like TypeScript. They enjoy that kind of thing. I know I do, but you have to really start thinking like an app developer instead of like a library author.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I think one of the craziest things is that even some of those libraries where like the external type safety is so strong, they'll even throw an any at it internally if it's not going to be like,
Oh yeah,
outwardly used, just
yeah.
because like productivity matters and, sometimes you do know better than the compiler.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, any exists for a reason. The language wouldn't be possible without it.
Exactly. We'd be writing Reason at that point, you know?
And I love the idea that like nobody really knows what JavaScript's doing.
Yeah, exactly. We just have a bunch of educated guesses.
Yes.
Okay. Um, so you mentioned like what you look for when you join a team. Like, what have you done on teams to like set people up for joining a team? Like, what is your favorite approach, right? Not like a Confluence doc or whatever, but like, how do you go about that?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest thing is, especially if it's like a mid-level developer, is just making sure that they feel comfortable, like giving them access to, making sure they have access to everything that they need, and then I'll go through the channels that they don't feel comfortable doing, or that they just don't know who to reach out to.
Uh-huh.
They don't know what access they're missing, really, right? See if that say what all you have access to. Getting that access, making sure that they know where to look for those knowledge resources if they have, and then just making sure that like I'm reaching out more than necessary even,
Sure.
so that like they feel comfortable, and telling them about my onboarding experience and telling them like things that I know we can improve, making sure that they don't feel like they have to like just start looking around and digging and figuring it out by themselves. The biggest thing is no matter where your knowledge is stored, no matter how how many projects you have, how many repos you have, they just need to feel comfortable like talking to you. Like, especially in
Yeah.
remote environments, they need to feel comfortable, not looking stupid, because nobody wants that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a really good point. Like when you join a project, you can feel like you're already like overburdening people by asking for this stuff. So being like the person who's there, reaching out to them to give them the option,
Yeah.
kind of like takes away some of that like imposter syndrome burden,
Mm.
right?
And,
And
and
you rate.
hopefully,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, hopefully by that point we've evaluated, during the interview process or something, what their weaknesses are, or where they're more likely where their strengths are, and where their strengths aren't. And seeing asking what they want to improve on, what the kind of projects they want to work on. So that those are the kind of first things that you introduce them to, because those first few weeks are especially important. That if the work that you give a new hire uh, sucks, or that, to them isn't what they like, it's just a bad way to start off, right? Like, why did I pick this again? So you just want to make sure that those are like kind of tailored to them, and that you're not giving them some mistakes I've seen before is that they get integrated, they start going the onboarding, people get swamped, the onboarding kind of falters halfway through, and then they're given a very critical task that they're not prepared for. Yeah, and then they end up failing 3 rounds of reviews, and now their confidence is shot. That's not a great experience for anyone.
Is there any like pattern you use to make the review process a little smoother? Like any tools or techniques or anything like that?
Uh, no. What do you
No.
mean? It
Well,
depends.
so at one previous job, we had conventional comments. So you're probably aware of conventional commits, where it's like feat colon
Hmm.
whatever, fix colon whatever. You do the same thing in review, but it's like knit colon something, and it's like,
Mm.
well, yeah, a knit is like it's not
Ignore.
important, but not always ignore,
I know.
but like, I
Just take it for what it is. It's not like not a blocker. Um, yeah, we no, nothing like that. Um, Really just kind of yeah, just kind of playing it by ear there.
sure, like
But
adapt as you go, I guess.
yeah, but I mean, we do make sure that we like it's multiple people review, and that everybody's like leaving. Just don't just disapprove. It's reject someone's PR without leaving like some really good detail on why.
Hmm.
And then
Do you use
yeah,
code owners at all, like
yeah,
as a thing? Okay,
we actually so at Universal we had a couple projects with code owners, and it became like in those projects it became like a really important and a thing we really liked, and especially knowing like who worked on what features, and so I really liked that. But I think that you know for me it was just a matter of, again, having that feedback loop, having that communication, and not just rejecting someone's PR, like, then going on to Slack and messaging them and nobody else saw why.
Right, right. Yeah, that like siloed knowledge of like the conversation,
Hmm.
right? Having that in public is definitely more useful,
Yeah,
in
well,
my
I mean,
opinion.
and I think the thought process is they don't want to publicly embarrass them, right?
Sure.
Which I get. There's a right way to do it,
Right.
without doing that. But yeah, then you end up with these sidebar conversations nobody sees, and then it's just like you come back a month later and you're like, why is this rejected? You know, it looks totally fine to me, and then you find out the reason wasn't anything that I would have said to reject it for.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So like code owners, did you have it based on like per project level? Was it like per folder, per like type of file or anything like that? Like maybe one person is like the migration like reviewer, right?
Yeah,
Like something like that.
we had it at there was the we didn't really need it for like project level because we just authorize the users that are allowed to be there.
Hmm.
But then we had it for like each there was kind of how you do submodules, but not just each folder kind of a different feature, a different part of the bigger whole,
Sure.
and that's where the co-owners would be. And if you worked on a feature, you might put it's like git ignore, right? You put it where you need it, and you can kind of keep traversing down into further.
Exactly, because inside the code owners file, you can have like even like globs that you're
Yeah.
tagging people for and stuff, right?
Yep, exactly.
Cool.
So yeah, I mean, but like I said, but my experience with it was good, and we really liked it. But yeah, that was like the only thing we did it for. So,
Hmm. Is there like a maintenance burden to code owners files, or do you find that pretty easy?
I think for anybody who hasn't done it, you just need to introduce them to the concept of it first. I mean, but I think that's everything. And when you're starting on the project, you're kind of open to all the new knowledge anyway. So it's just one more thing,
Sure.
one other thing you have to do. And before that, we kind of had a process where a manual process through our like commenting, when you were doing like a feature or something, you put that you are like the owner of that feature. If you need help, message this person, um
Okay.
that kind
And
of
does that
thing.
live as like a comment somewhere?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it might live in the readme too. Like and one thing we do is a lot is same thing. Like a lot of people don't know this, but if you're using like GitHub, you can have multiple folders and multiple readmes, and that will show up when you go into that folder like as the primary
Yep.
page. So you can use it as like a documentation for that section of the code.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. That's a great pattern
Mm.
for sure. Okay. Cool. We are getting up on time. I don't want to keep too much of your time occupied. Is there anything like specific you wanted to shout out or let people know about, like something fun you're working on, or just anything you want to promote?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really, I don't do anything like that. I do Crablang, and I just got a new job, so don't like, I'm in a weird spot where I'm just like kind of playing things by ear. I don't chill much too much, but
You did some stuff for boot dev though, right?
that is true. Lane would love if I shouted out
Yeah,
boot.dev.
shout out some boot dev.
Yeah, I did that functional programming course in Python, which might sound odd, but I think the course is great. I think my walkthrough is even better. And you can get like I've got like promo codes Travi at checkout. You can get like 25% off. Um,
Cool.
and I was surprised though because I get like significant kickbacks from that.
Oh, really? Oh, that's
and
awesome.
and they just keep coming in. I thought nothing of it, and I actually just did a walkthrough. Just finished recording another walkthrough of the algorithms course,
Oh, cool.
which was super fun. Love functional programming, love algorithms. So both those courses were really fun to do the walkthrough. The algorithms course is a lot more involved. I will say it's a lot longer. We go through. It starts everywhere from just like basic algorithms, like just explaining what it is, and then like basically input output, to going through like sorting algorithms, and then going all the way to like NP complete, NP hard, polynomial time, and things like that. And so it goes really deep. I think it's a great course. And honestly, before I got this job at Crunchyroll, I was really pushing the lane because I was on my way out at Universal, and I was like, nah, now's the time, man. Now's the
Yep.
time.
Come on, let me get some of those royalties. Basically, it's
No,
like being a pro musician at that point, you
well,
know?
and I just, like I would really love I really love the education. I really love education, and I really love what they're doing. I think the platform's great, like this whole gamified kind of like D&D kind of esque way of learning. I just think it's really, really cool what they're doing.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's a great platform. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. I hope you enjoyed hearing Travis just talk about all the cool stuff he's done, stuff he's working on, stuff he's planning. And yeah, hopefully you'll join us for the next episode coming up next month. So cheers, and thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for having me.